the Spirit open our hearts and minds to the truth of these scriptures today. How do we know today whether something is true or trustworthy? Does anyone here remember the BBC clip about harvesting spaghetti from trees in Italy? It was an April Fool's joke from the 1960s, harmless and humorous. But as a child, it had me intrigued, not only for the content, I was nearly fooled, but the source, the BBC presenting something that wasn't true. This week, I think I narrowly avoided being scammed online. I was in a mindset of, let's get this job done. But thankfully, my cautious eye for detail alerted me to something that wasn't quite right. I did not click on the link. I took action and deleted and reported junk. I felt relieved, but I was concerned. Concerned that on the surface, this text furthered my inquiry. But the underlying reality was most likely serving someone else's interest at my expense, and this reality was hidden. In today's gospel reading, Jesus is being interrogated by the Roman governor of his land, Pilate. And Pilate asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus responds, "I was born into this world to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth hears my voice." Now, the word that John is using for truth in his gospel has the root "not hidden." And in his opening chapter, the prologue of praise for the Logos, or word of life, John proclaims that the true light that shines on everyone was coming into the world, such light that would never be overcome by darkness, never hidden. Repeatedly, John refers to Jesus as light, truth, and life, embodying the life-giving, redemptive, and renewing love of God, and sustained by God's Spirit of truth. And 2 millennia later, in our very different world, many, including ourselves here today, hold to this faith, bearing witness in our hearts and minds, words and deeds, families and communities. Pilate responds to Jesus with a very terse phrase: "What is truth?" And this too echoes down the centuries as it expresses a might is right, expedient, power-based view of our flawed humanity. A view that is present wherever empires colonize and enslave occupied peoples, wherever Earth's precious and finite resources are manipulated by the few to the cost of the many. Present wherever our grasp on entitlement becomes greater than our practice of responsibility, whether we be presidents, corporate managers, community leaders, or playground bullies. Jesus tells Pilate that his kingdom is not of this world. And Pilate understands that Jesus is no insurrectionist. He offers to return his prisoner to his people, saying that he finds Jesus not guilty of anything. It is Jesus' own people, the leaders of his own religious faith, who clamor for his death and ask for a known insurrectionist to be released instead. Why? Jesus has persistently challenged to the very core their self-interested interpretation of Jewish law, declaring, "You cannot serve both God and money." And that too is a challenge that echoes down the centuries to us today. Testifying to the truth costs Jesus his life, and this is at the heart of his kingship. To understand this further, let's turn to our reading from the book of Revelation. The writer of this book, in verse 9, says this: "I am John, a follower together with all of you. We suffer because Jesus is our King, but he gives us strength to endure. I was sent to Patmos Island because I had preached God's message and told about Jesus." So the writer is John, a Christian prophet, a prisoner on the island of Patmos, writing to 7 churches in 7 cities in what is today Western Turkey, probably in the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian in the late 1st century. He writes to encourage early Christians who live under Roman rule and culture, and who faced opposition and harassment, victimization, violence, and even death because of their Christian faith, to encourage them to endure. But more than endure. He opens his book of visions with a prayer of blessing that encompasses these communities and their lived experiences in a vastly infinite understanding of God who is and was and is to come. He lifts their hearts and minds to the biggest picture possible, and he uses the symbol of Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end of the Greek alphabet, a symbol which perhaps suggests all that can be known, all that can be understood, and way more. For there is so much more than we in our limited humanity can ever know or understand. And John prays 3 times for these Christians to have the blessing of kindness and peace from God, from the interceding Spirit, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness. Kindness and peace. When you or I experience loss or trauma or uncertainty, what do we most need? Kind words, support that comes alongside us, recognition of our experience, someone practically smoothing the way through. These are all vital responses that bring healing and build our strength when we feel most vulnerable. So John of Patmos stresses that Christ's love is now with those he has forgiven, redeemed, and renewed, in spite of all persecutions and difficulties. For, he says, Jesus, the faithful witness, was the first to conquer death, and he is the ruler of all earthly kings. John, in the tension of already, but not yet, believes that our salvation will be finally complete when all dehumanizing powers are overcome and a new heaven and a new earth come into being. At the heart of this early Christian faith is the experience of Jesus as the resurrected Christ, actively present in their community and speaking through prophets and apostles. He writes for those who hunger and thirst for justice. He comforts and blesses them. He lifts their hearts and minds to understand that they are not only persecuted and afraid, but also held within the conquering Christ's love and power. He also warns them not to project evil and failure only onto others, for we all, Christians and non-Christians alike, will be subject to the final judgment of our Creator God, who is Alpha and Omega. As I reflected on this opening prayer, I recognized that while I have experienced grief and trauma in my life, for the most part, I have lived peaceably in a peaceable country where I am free to practice my Christian faith without fear or hindrance. And for that, I am profoundly thankful. If we scratch the surface of British history, we very quickly arrive in times of persecution and martyrdom, where clashes between religious faith and political power, between wealth and poverty, are inextricably linked. In our 21st century, multicultural and multi-faith population here in the British Isles, the United Nations' right to freedom of religion and belief is fundamental to our social cohesion, our capacity to hold diversity in community. Never let anybody say to you that religious faith is irrelevant. It is the opposite. And then I asked myself, where are Christians in today's world suffering for their faith? The UK government says that promoting the right of freedom of religion and belief is a priority in its human rights work internationally. And in January of this year and of next year, the House of Commons hosted a launch for the World Watch list of countries where on-the-ground research shows this right is not upheld. I sourced the following information from opendoorsuk.org, where more details can be found. Here is a map of 50 countries where 317 million Christians face very high or extreme levels of persecution. Next is a list of the top 19 countries. What trends do we see? The 2024 reported that violence against Christians in sub-Saharan Africa takes place in the context of economic instability, climate change, and fractures in governance and security that have enabled militants of opposing factions to exploit chaos. Another trend is that autocratic governments are increasingly deeming Christians to be foes, not friends. And this is coupled with a rise of surveillance, attacks, and closures of church buildings and property. And in the Middle East, many Christians, alongside many others in their populations, have been displaced from their land and their homes and cannot return. The statistics show these. Nearly 5,000 Christians were murdered in the last year of 2023. Nearly 15,000 churches and Christian properties were attacked in the year of 2023. And over 4,000 Christians were detained in these 50 countries. Well, this sobered and shocked me as I read. Was there any good news? Yes. Churches are growing. And in Mali, changes to the country's constitution includes recognition of the Christian minority. In India, in one state, the new ruling party have promised to revise the anti-conversion laws that have targeted Christians. In Sri Lanka, some church closures have been prevented because pastors have been taught to stand up for their rights. And in North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, increasingly people go online to worship, fellowship, and grow in faith. I ask myself the question, would this information shift any of my perspectives on people who wish to come to the UK as a migrant? Would it shift any of your perspectives? To return to the view of Alpha and Omega, there is much that is uncertain and plain scary in our world today. We believe and we stand with the God who is, who was, who is to come. And our hope is created moment by moment through our deliberate choices, using our feelings and thoughts and actions to make what is possible step by step. Hope is created when we stand with and reach out to one another, whether it's to the person in your pew or someone else in another country. And hope is created by God's indwelling Spirit of truth, who lifts our hearts and minds and spirits to trust in the love and justice of God, who is infinitely greater than our fears and divisions. May we, and all whom we hold dear, and all Christians across this world, be blessed with kindness and peace from God, who is, who was, and who is to come, the Alpha and Omega of our faith. Amen.